Tim was at the
One of those.
project finally.
Yeah.
Come to fruition.
Clear it up.
And then they.
I got it.
At least once.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, you got a good thing for it. Took that,
Another location.
Okay.
Well.
A little bit.
Last one, Mission Share was saying.
Mhm.
We had to go higher too, right? I mean, that's a lot of
Right.
Well, they were telling me
Great
it's
job.
like
It's good in business.
Yeah. Every month they were trying to get was, $1 million. So even the deal they had, doing that.
And they got an art tent.
Yeah, me too.
And are they making paper? Or making
Yeah.
paper in Carthage? Can they make it in Carthage?
Scott, you saying?
I need to see.
Jared, what's new? What's that?
Yeah.
Your district?
Yeah.
79 write-ins compared to 200 votes. Oh, crazy, yeah, I'm assuming that the write-ins are, gosh. I mean, I have a lot of credit for getting out there.
No one from Martinsburg visited my house.
Right in.
Some of them didn't have very much, like advertising, so you think they would have been knocking on doors to compensate. But no one was out.
All these letters.
Anybody here have a sign here?
The Democrat. And.
I'm good, thank you. For Greg, the guy got drugged before the dad was. Remember I showed you the letter?
You bring something for everybody?
You want some, Ron?
All right, Tina won't be here today, and Jerry will maybe be here. So we might as well get going. 7 after. So Brittany is testing out the live streaming today. I guess the only people with a link are us and Coughlin, so hopefully it's not public. But it is going on over there in the corner.
It is public.
It is public.
If you search for it, you might find it. Hopefully
Yeah,
nobody's
it is
searching.
public, but I'm just gonna delete it after.
And you come to, so if you don't mind to know, I think we've been relatively progressive in this, and I don't know if Brittany started it or Coughlin Printing started it, but Coughlin Printing put together a one-stop package. We just sign up for $800, $700, and they put everything in place for us. We've shared that with a bunch of other IDAs, and others are picking up on it, so we really, we think we're kind of out in front of this, so.
Yeah, they took the opportunity and ran with it, so they're getting a lot of IDAs.
And one time cost for us, but it will be easy to manage, easy to operate, we believe, and they're there as a, support when needed.
Does it stop during an executive session?
Yeah,
Let's
well,
hear
we could, I have a speaker, I
it.
can
Okay. So,
power.
Muted.
So, like,
What if there's a
on our website-
liberating person out there?
Yeah, on our
I'm just kidding.
website, it's live streaming
I
right
get
now. That's a little.
Right,
I thought we should put an ad up over the camera for any local businesses of the month.
Yeah.
So
Get some revenue out of it, maybe.
Right.
Executive session, right?
You can all vote Survivor style, walk up to the camera. I'm voting for Joe.
All right, so, and I don't know what your time frame is, Kevin, do we want to start
Oh, I didn't mean to disrupt your order. I can go into any order you want.
We can maybe get through our basic reports and approvals.
Okay,
I think Kevin probably can take a little bit.
all right, so Cheyenne sent out the, meetings from the October, or the minutes from the October meeting 2 days ago. Did everyone have a chance to look them over? Have a motion to,
Sure.
second, Ron? Any discussion?
I have the same problem with them with the other. Likes to stay in the corner.
All right, all in favor? Opposed? All right, thanks. All right, now we also had notes sent out from the finance and governance committees. Anything on those? Motion to, or I guess we don't need a motion for those. Okay, yeah, just a reminder they're there. All right, September financials. Diane?
We reviewed them in the finance committee. Nothing really jumping out. Still a few things rolling in from this building, but I'm kind of letting any incoming bills that need to be reconciled and anything that we're billing out still for the building, making sure that's all said and done before I do a complete reconciliation of that, and we determine from our sale price what needs to go back in the economic development fund, versus what needs to cover some of the costs, et cetera. So I'm hoping I can do that mid-month this month and have it for the finance committee. Any questions on balance sheet or P&L? We are moving ahead. We have had some back and forth with ESD regarding the grant for this building that they're letting us keep even though we sold the building. That does seem to be moving forward, so hopefully we'll see that money within the next couple months.
That's awesome. All right, motion to approve financials, got it? Second?
Sure.
Ron?
Cool question. Do we, I was just at a conference last month and they were talking about non-for-profits who have certain balances that they have to have an IPS, which is investment policy statement. Do we have one or do we not need one?
We have an investment policy and we are required to have an investment policy. It's not really very detailed.
Okay.
But yes, and yeah,
It exists.
it does.
Okay.
And then I don't know, maybe do a follow-up guide, and we've not I think in years past, the IDA was a little more proactive with investing,
Yeah.
using some CDs or some
Sure.
higher interest money markets. We've not done that over the last, I don't know how many years, but
I just wanted to make sure we had one because I think the law was that we have, I didn't know, okay.
All right, so we had a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Thanks. All right, now we can jump down to,
yeah, I think Flat Rock would be on the agenda under pilot updates, and so quick introduction for anybody that hasn't met Kevin McCullough. Is an attorney with Barclay Damon. Kevin was on the ground floor when the Flat Rock project was done 20 years ago, not quite that long.
19.
So the taxing jurisdictions in the IDA agreed to use his assistance as we went through this renewal of the pilot, created a new pilot under us for Flat Rock. So that's been going on for a year or a little bit more, and getting closer to wrapping that up. I mean, agreements were all reached tentatively early this year. So Kevin's been working with the company's attorneys and all the legal documents moving forward, and just had a couple things that we need your final authorization for today, and then wrap it up on our end. And I'll let him give a little detail on that.
Thank you. So, a term sheet, as you probably all know, was worked out and approved by all the taxing jurisdictions. In February of this year, you sent out what's referred to as a deviation notice, because this term sheet is not in line with the uniform tax exemption policy. This is not a new project. This is really a settlement moving forward so that the taxing jurisdictions have predictability on what the taxes are going to be on what we call a declining value or a wasting asset. All of this equipment in the renewable realm gets taxed as real property, but it's not like normal real property. It's more like those trucks out there. They're declining in value all the time, no matter how good your maintenance program is, they are going to wear out. I'm working on several projects right now in Steuben County and Erie County, where the original expected life of the equipment was 20, and we got between 10 and 8 out of it. And now the company's having to go and spend millions per turbine to replace them all. You're lucky in a sense that these turbines, I think, were GE or Vestas at the outset, and they last well, and they're projected now to last through at least 2031. So there's a life expectancy here that has beat the industry in many ways. Over the last few months, we've had 2 important changes that some in this room are fully familiar with. We had insisted that if they repower this thing, that there be a renegotiation of the pilot. And what is repowering? It can really mean changing the nacelle and the rotor and the blades at the top. And when you do that and you put on new equipment, you've extended its useful life. And when you've extended its useful life, you increased its fair market value. They were insisting that the pilot would only be redone if all of them got redone, which is a little absurd in a project as large as this. We've now settled on if they do more than 50%, then we get to renegotiate the pilot. Another important concession that was made just 2 weeks ago was if they go around and they change individual heads out, they had said that the pilot would only be changed if they decreased the wattage on the output. And we thought that was a ridiculous situation because nowadays there's much better technology, much newer technology. People aren't replacing the heads, as we call them, on the top of the towers with the exact same thing. They're replacing them with a better output, etc. So just 2 weeks ago, they came back and acknowledged that if they increase the output, then the pilot likewise goes proportionately upward. So you've got 2 resolutions to resolve today. The first is seeker. Now, that's very easy in this context. Ordinarily, this board would have to review in detail all the environmental aspects of a project and determine whether or not there are any negative impacts that would cause you to not approve the project. In this case, the seeker was done years ago on what we call a coordinated review by the town of Martinsburg. They were the lead agency, and they went through the full environmental impact process. So in other words, first they did a draft environmental impact statement. That was put out for comment to the public. There were comments, there was analysis. Then that led to a final environmental impact statement, and then findings. All of that was published. Today, we have in front of us a project for this agency which has no changes from that original project that was approved. There are no additional environmental impacts. There are none that have arisen over time that were not originally analyzed or reviewed. So your determination today is very simple because you're just relying on the environmental impact statement that was done before. And since there are no changes to this project, there are no additional impacts that you would have to analyze and determine. So I think the draft resolution which I've drawn, which you can vote upon, is what we refer to as a negative declaration, that there are no negative environmental impacts that would cause you to push this project to do a new environmental impact statement. As you all know, there are no changes. This is really what I would call a fiscal resolution as opposed to an expansion or modification of the project. So in this resolution, we simply recite that originally Martinsburg did the coordinated review, and that's on section 1. And underneath that, then, that the project consists of components described in the third whereas. The third whereas, of course, is defining that this project exists in Martinsburg, Harrisburg, Lowville, Watson, and Alden in Lewis County. And again, there are no changes that are proposed. So there's no new equipment being acquired. The relief that the IDA is being requested to provide herein is simply a pilot. So unlike your standard project, there's no mortgage tax relief, there is no sales tax relief. It is just a new pilot on the terms that have been worked out by the taxing jurisdiction. Yes, I remember. There's more down there.
So the only changes they're gonna do is physically upgrading equipment.
Well, this action by the IDA, great question. This action by the IDA doesn't authorize them to make changes to the facility, okay? This action by the IDA only settles the pilot through 2031. If they are going to make changes to the facility, they have to go one of two routes. If they fall below certain criteria in the changes that they make, and I understand there are no proposed changes on the table, no one has said that. We're simply keeping the door open that this pilot then could react if they did make changes, all right? If they make changes, then they would have to determine how, on a regulatory basis, those changes would be approved. Would it be something that would be done under seeker again, and they would go back and look at the original analysis and determine whether or not that impact statement needed modification? Or because we now have a new Article 10 in New York, would the proposed changes, whatever they may be of a magnitude such that Article 10 would come into play like it has on other wind farms in this area and in the state now? All new wind farms are subject to Article 10. So you're not approving any changes to the facility. Your action relates totally to the creation of a pilot agreement with no changes to the facility contemplated.
Kevin, does this in any way tie our hands in any capacity?
No. I mean, that resolution right there, seeker,
Right.
is a very simple one, because since there are no changes and there was an extensive review done before,
Right.
all you're saying is there are no additional environmental impacts that were not considered, reviewed, or analyzed the first time around.
Okay.
And therefore, that's why we call this an unlisted action.
Okay.
And a little bit more on this so we're all clear. There are three types of actions under seeker. There's one called a type 1, which has very specific criteria published by DEC. Disturbance of 10 acres or more, creation of residential units in excess of a number, building in excess of a certain size or height. None of those things are relevant here because there is no new construction. There's another part called a type 2, in which you have to take no action whatsoever, meaning it's exempted because some other agency like the Public Service Commission or DEC is the reviewing body. We're not in that case. We are following this other body, appropriately named unlisted actions. And there are some unlisted actions, even though it sounds crazy that the statute calls them unlisted actions and then lists them. But it's an unlisted list of actions. We fall into that category because it's not something that's being newly created of such a magnitude that it would be a type 1, and it's not exempted elsewhere as a type 2, therefore it's unlisted. So this one's a very simple resolution before you to determine that there are no negative impacts. And you always hear the term, well, who did the negative declaration on it? That's what this resolution is. A negative declaration that there are no significant adverse environmental impacts that need further review or study.
So just out of curiosity, going forward with new projects, is the Article 10 board responsible for the seeker review at that point, or does it still fall back to?
So let's go back to what might happen here. There are thresholds which require Article 10 to be kicked in. Like they're increasing the output by more than 25 megawatts. So hypothetically here, just speculating, because I'm working on some other repowerings myself. I'm working on some where we're not increasing the output at all. We're swapping out a 2.5 turbine for a 2.5 turbine. So therefore, Article 10 does not come into play in that situation. But if they were to take these turbines here and increase them such, so that the wind farm increased in output by more than, I think it's 25 megawatts, then Article 10 would be called into play. Now, to your specific question, If something is in Article 10, there is no separate seeker process because the Public Service Commission coordinates with DEC, and the environmental review that would ordinarily be done by a board such as yours or the town of Martinsburg, that environmental review is subsumed within that Article 10 DEC/PSC process, okay?
Any other questions on the seeker resolution? So this will need a roll call vote. So do we have a motion to,
I'll make a motion.
Jared,
Second.
second by Tom, any discussion? All right. Ron?
Stupid question, what am I, I'm not exactly sure what question I'm answering.
That that you're determining that there are no negative environmental impacts.
I was just gonna say I was present.
We have to do a roll call.
That counts too.
All right, I didn't know this.
We have to do a roll call.
So it's a yay or nay kind of.
That's correct. It's either-
Then I'll say yay.
Goggin?
Yeah.
Jared? Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Tina and Jerry are absent.
Okay. The next resolution is what we call the approving and final resolution. This resolution does two things then. It, there's some past on that side. So now what this resolution recites is that, again, an application was made. You've now done the seeker, so you can move on to this resolution. And that the taxing jurisdictions working with the applicants have determined that they have a memorandum which defines what the taxes would be through 2031. So that's one aspect. You're not using your uniform tax exemption policy or the auspices of the Economic Development Department working with an assessor to determine how much the taxes should be, what's the value, et cetera. That's all been determined by the taxing jurisdictions in the memorandum. And so therefore, you're relying on that memorandum to say what the tax payments would be under the pilot, and therefore it's a deviation. One other deviation as well, under the general municipal law, IDAs need to take an annual pilot payment and distribute it amongst the involved taxing agencies in accordance with their then tax rates. That's a proportionate distribution. In this case, the taxing jurisdictions have worked out amongst themselves a distribution plan, and the IDA is likewise adopting that distribution plan. So that's also a deviation, as we say, from both your uniform tax exemption policy and from the general municipal law. Only thing to really highlight, lots of language in this resolution, and what it does is it provides the history of how we got here, this project, the discussions that occurred, the determination that providing this pilot is in the best interest of Lewis County and all the taxing jurisdictions, because it continues then the presence of this wind farm, and quite frankly, it likewise creates an environment where when 2031 comes around, or even before that, they would likely repower this. I mean, the asset that you have that's the most important here is the wind. It's not, and barring something that's not foreseeable, that wind will be here for years to come. And if the governor's plan for the continuation of the enlargement of the renewable asset portfolio in the state continues, then likewise incentives and other tax breaks, both on the state and federal level, will continue to accrue. And likewise, then this development would continue. I think this is sort of an interim step by this agency, creating an environment in which you say, not only to the existing owners, but to others, that Lewis County is open for business, welcomes renewable assets, and then therefore they're going to continue to be a source of tax revenue for you into the future. The only distinction, and this is for those in the room who have spent months on the memorandum, The memorandum created a payment scheme which called for 42 million in pilot payments. But on section 2, and I apologize, the pages aren't really numbered, I guess it's on page 6, B at the top, you'll see it says it's estimated that this project will generate 29 million in pilot payments. Well, now, as Ryan well knows, the total term sheet memorandum was for 42 million. But out of that 42 million was what I'll call the delayed with consent 18 payment and a 19 payment, both of which totaling 13 million. So now this will pick up then with the pilot payments after that. So the pilot payments under this agreement are 29 million. But that is all consistent with the memorandum of 42 million determined by the taxing jurisdictions. And I just wanted to highlight that in case somebody looked at it and said, wait a minute, I thought there was 42 million coming and this only says 29. The math is correct. And I had it at 42 at first, and I think the version I sent to Eric had 42 in it. And then I went back and looked and said, well, wait a minute, acknowledged that they already made 2 payments under that other schedule of 13 million. So that's really the only highlight in here. And as I said, the pilot and the lease are now in final form. And the 2 major changes that have occurred over the last few months, one just in the last couple of weeks, was that if they increase the nameplate capacity of these during the term of this pilot, then the pilot will proportionately go up. And if they undertake a repowering, meaning that they leave the turbine towers there, we change everything at the top, and they do more than 50%, then we go back to the table and say, okay, what's the value now of these new pieces? Both of which I think are important pieces because you would want them to increase the output of this. If there's newer and better technology, and you then as a community would benefit from that investment, those are important pieces. Yes?
The 50% over what period of time?
Over the term of the pilot.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know, just an aside here, I can say from my other experience in working with other companies that have large wind farms, it's highly unlikely that anybody's ever gonna just repower 25% of a wind farm.
Right.
And the reason is that all of this equipment is controlled by a control center. The worst thing you could do to your employees and yourself is have different types of equipment with different output, different operating parameters on a wind farm. If they do it, they're gonna do at least half of it or all of it. And quite frankly, that's what you actually want or hope that they would do until over time. You know, you've got plenty of wind to take some of these newer, more efficient turbines that put out more. The only issue in this area, I think, is going to be the fact that there are constraints on how much power they can push out. There were years ago, and I don't know if those constraints have been lifted or not, but the transmission lines leaving Lewis County only had a limited capacity when we first started this project, and I don't know if that's been changed or not. So at times, they have been what we call constrained, and that is literally an order that comes through the New York State Independent System Operator, NISO, that says there's too much power on this line, cut back, and then they have to curtail their operation. So that before you then is the approving resolution. This then is the final resolution of the IDA. It authorizes then the executive director, the chairman of the board, whoever you want, to go and execute the final documents, deliver them, finalize this. We would then file with all of the town assessors a document known as a 412A exemption form, which is the exemption form tied to an IDA pilot. And at the moment, assuming that Eric's is available, we'll be closing this on December 11th. Documentation is ready to go, assuming that this board approves of this pilot.
And so just having pointed out B on page 6 and C just says, again, to reiterate that what we're approving is what the effective taxing jurisdictions have agreed upon. So they presented us with their agreement and we're accepting that. So any other questions?
Do you have that schedule, the final distribution schedule?
Yes. Yeah, and it will be attached to the pilot, and it hasn't changed from the one that everybody signed off on, and is in the interim. And do I have it memorized? No, I don't.
No, that's okay. I just was, we did a funky thing where we froze the 2005 distribution for the first 3 years.
Yeah.
And then proceeded after that. Since we've now eaten into 1.5 of those years.
Right.
I just want to make sure that we're not bumping down the freeze to an additional.
No,
3. Okay.
no. We're taking that original schedule of 42, and I think in the actual form of the pilot itself, we might attach the whole schedule, Ryan, but then acknowledge that they've already paid those first 2 payments under the interim agreement.
I just wanted to make sure it was a schedule and not the first 3 years will
No.
be, because then that's gonna.
Yeah, that's a great point. Lots of times on an IDA pilot, your left-hand column may say year 1, year 2, year 3, and then next to it, there's schedule of payments. Well, here, that left-hand column doesn't say year 1, it has actual calendar years, to Ryan's point. So we're not now moving this forward or changing it. We have a specific designated schedule of how much is paid in a calendar year.
Thank you. Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
Don't be shy.
I know, why is this?
Motion by Ron, a second.
I'll second.
Jared, any discussion? All right, and again, we need a roll call vote, so Ron,
Aye.
Goggins. Jared. Tom.
Aye.
Aye. All right, great, Jerry and Tina are aye. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Welcome. You are? Okay, great. I'll confirm then. We have a closing on the 11th. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Would you like me to scan my marked copies to you?
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'll fill them in and send them back. Yep. Got it. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Great day.
Bye.
We didn't talk SU basketball at all, let's do that sometime.
For another day, they lost it. So it was a bad night all around.
Yeah. All right, so now, do we want to just go back to the top of the agenda?
Yes, we can do that.
All right, so,
Yeah, so we have new board member processes, the first item on the agenda, and I think the governance committee might have had some discussion about this a week or two ago, if I recall. But just to your, any other discussion or thoughts you might have, we will have a vacancy at the end of December as Tina will be moving and submitting her resignation. And the county has already initiated a search for interested parties. So those couple things will be moving ahead, and just so that, again, if any other discussion you have, I think the governance committee, some of the discussion was just to ensure that the IDA board is involved in the process as the county continues to move forward. I don't know if anybody else was part of that discussion, wants any other comments, but
so Cheyenne emailed out the link to the county website where they advertise that, and, again, obviously we want the best person for the job, right? And there's some skill sets like realty and development and insurance and things, things like that, that if someone brought that sort of knowledge from their professional life to the board is always helpful in the types of things we deal with, so. Obviously, the county will handle the process and with our involvement with some interviews, but if you have anyone in mind and that link that Cheyenne sent out, just encourage them to send a letter of interest to the county so that their name is in consideration.
We chatted yesterday, no, go ahead, Larry.
Well, I was just gonna say, there has been one response to that advertisement already that looks very interesting. Eric's got it, and you can send it around to the board members. And Ryan and I did talk about IGA participation in the interview process and the selection process, and we have no problem with that. Actually think it's a great idea.
Are you open to names here or?
Well,
If you have someone that you think is interested, you need to have them.
Yeah,
Yeah, just encourage them to apply.
yeah, have them call me or, I mean, better yet, they can call Terry Clark directly, but they can call us and if they have any questions, so, yeah.
All right, any other pilot updates besides the?
Yeah, actually a couple, and I did, so in my executive director's report, I did have a little bit of detail there, but a couple things I thought I would highlight. Roaring Brook is moving forward. Kevin's been on vacation, but if he's caught up a little bit this week, I think as far as about a week ago, we released their escrow. We signed all the documents in escrow a month ago, and they requested that it be released, meaning they are starting work. So I think that's pretty much happened. And I did hear just yesterday that they are working roads and some tree cutting, so that project is moving forward. Number 3 Wind has their Article 10 final hearing next Tuesday, I believe it is, in Albany. The feedback from the company was they expect the Article 10 board will wrap it up that day. So they'll have an approval or a not approval. They're assuming it will be an approval, but the comment I was given was if the conditions are too much for the company, that might affect their decision whether they build the project or not.
Did you guys see the Wall Street Journal article?
I did.
Forgot to share that around with the board.
I refuse to pay the fee, so I didn't receive it.
I got a free click or something.
Yeah, I've got it. I'll try to remember to share it with all of you. Yep. So I guess that's still an unknown. Again, I think my understanding was that the Article 10 board has imposed some significant hurdles, conditions, wind, decibel noises, et cetera. And they're gonna have to make a final evaluation given whatever is the final amounts are on Tuesday.
Do you know if Bill ever received word that he got appointed? He did get appointed?
Yes, I got a letter, Larry.
I believe he's planning to attend on Tuesday.
Eric, sorry, not to interject, but anybody, they're doing a like video conference as well. Anybody can call in for that meeting. There's a link to, if you want to witness the whole thing. They can't hear you or anything, but you
Thank you.
can.
Duke Energy, maybe let's come back to that one at the end of the agenda and see where we get. I just got some documents from them at 5 o'clock yesterday. We've been kind of still going back and forth a little bit on the final dollars for a pilot. So if we get some time, we can come back to that. It's a little frustrating as usual because they come in at the last minute and want us to review something. So let's hold that one and we'll come back if we have some time. Copenhagen Wind, I wanted to update you again, and I think we might have let you know, we had this interesting twist with their property taxes and the Copenhagen school. I updated you on that at one point. What's happened in the last week to week and a half, again, there was an October 31st deadline on that issue. Kevin and the company's attorneys had been trying to get that resolved with the Jefferson County Real Property Office. That was not successfully accomplished before this October 31st deadline, and the company did file an Article 78 lawsuit last Thursday, I believe the date was. The tax bill for the Copenhagen school was in the $90,000 range. I think the company and I think Kevin are very much believe that tax bill should not have been generated, and the company's stance was they're not going to pay a $90,000 tax bill that should not have occurred. Jefferson County did not would say was not real cooperative in trying to resolve that, so that's what the company had to do.
Just give you a little bit more background. This was a project that was mostly in Lewis County, and there was a feeder line to the main line, that was in Jefferson County. And the Lewis County IDA took the lead and handled both parts of the project, the Lewis County and the Jefferson County project. In the course of doing that, there was a negotiation with all of the various municipalities, the towns of Champion, I think, and Rutland, and then the county were all at the table, all part of this negotiation, and all agreed to and signed off on a memorandum of understanding, which was to be followed by a pilot agreement, which was filed properly, was provided, copies were provided to the county, copies provided all the towns and the assessors. And somehow the county ignored all of that and created a tax parcel number for this, basically the feeder line. And instead of putting it on the exempt rolls, they put it on the utility rolls, which meant it was taxable. And as a result, and that's because the IDA is actually entitled to that property because it was conveyed to the IDA and then conveyed back. So because of the IDA being entitled, it's automatically exempt. You can't tax property that the IDA owned. So they made a big mistake there. And then second, the pilot agreement basically says how much is the developer going to be paying in exchange for that exempt property status. And the pilot agreement was filed, prepared, all this kind of stuff, Russian. And they just ignored it. Then when it was, the first time it became apparent that it was ignored was when the school tax bill came out. The company got the school tax bill and basically has been calling to try to find out what's going on. There was a simple process to fix this in which the assessors sign a form and say, yeah, a mistake was made, we want to do this. And Pete Schwartz I talked to one of the assessors, he talked to both of them. Eventually both assessors were willing to sign off on this, but Roxanne Burns, the Jefferson County Real Property Tax Director, kind of said, let's get the Jefferson County Attorney involved before you sign off on this. And so it's now in the hands of Dave Paulson. I have spoken to Dave. I know him back from my county attorney days. We both kind of started as county attorneys at the same time. So we've had a couple conversations about it. I know it's litigation, and I'm hoping we're not going to have too many quotes in the paper about it, but he is he's working on that right now. But in the meantime, there's the Article 78 is a proceeding by which an individual or company sues a municipality. That is a very short statute of limitations of only 4 months. So the attorneys for Copenhagen Wind Farm felt that they had to start this lawsuit by October 31st, just to comply with that 4-month statute. So they started the lawsuit more or less as a placeholder in hopes that they won't be necessary to get a judge to order the county, Jefferson County, to comply. But and that's what this is here. This is the complaint there. But it has been filed, it's in place, and we're still working with Dave Paulson, the Jefferson County Attorney, Roxanne Burns, the Jefferson County Real Property Tax Director, and the assessors have agreed that a mistake was made, and we just need to hopefully get the county on board to get it all fixed. Problem is that there's a $90,000 school tax bill, which could create a hole in the county, this Copenhagen School District budget. So I will say this about that the IDA, the pilot that was negotiated specifically said that Copenhagen Central School was not to get any payments out of the pilot agreement, because they were getting a substantial payment out of the much larger Lewis County pilot. So the school, in order to, I guess, be a good guy and to help persuade Jefferson County to go along with this, said, we don't need any money out of this pilot. So it's almost like a windfall to them where they have $90,000 coming in from this. So it should be correct. Hopefully it'll be corrected before the county tax bills come out, which are just gonna make, it's just gonna multiply and make things worse. So that's where it stands right now.
I think the whole, that Kevin mentioned, me and I haven't had a chance to talk about this in a while, but I know expert on school, how the school tax rolls will work, but this property's on the tax roll. I think they've calculated their tax rates, assuming, given with that number built in, they had no assumption that they were gonna be getting a tax, but I'm thinking the calculation now is gonna be a shortfall on what they've taxed everyone else.
Right.
So I think they're gonna have a hole in their budget. We've made them aware of it going back to September. I have really not had very much feedback from the school at all, but I think they're gonna.
Because the county submitted their total valuation with this parcel on the rolls.
That would be correct too.
And so, the Copenhagen's not gonna challenge what is given to them by the real property tax departments. They're just gonna say, all right, if this is our total valuation, then we're gonna take that times our rate, that equals our levy. I mean, that's our revenue. So,
Well, even on your budget, Brian,
same exact thing.
it's now overstated by,
Right.
I mean, the value of this utility equipment, I mean, the number was not, it's not 94,000, the value.
But it won't affect us because I don't use anything outside of Lewis County for our.
Okay, good point.
Well,
So-
so
Yeah,
the question is Jefferson County liable for this mistake to make the school whole?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer to that question is.
Yeah, I don't know if Jefferson County has the same policy that we do, that if some property owner doesn't pay their taxes, the county makes it up. I don't know that, but I think that the issue also just might be when this is fixed, it will be off the tax roll, so the Jefferson, that might not even come into play. I think the school is gonna come out on the short end of this.
After they were the ones that
We're the good guy.
the good guy to make the process on.
Right.
Given Jefferson County's well-known stance on energy pilots, was this a mistake or a reinforcement of their position?
I can't get into their heads to know that, but there's an awful lot of suspicion about how it ended up this way.
Right.
But the bottom line is that it clearly was a mistake. I mean, they can't do what they did. And so it appears that, I'm guessing the bias came into play when they were looking at this. But on the other hand, you can't do what they did. I mean, they're just wrong.
Is it legal?
So,
And that was the whole reason why the Lewis County IDA went into Jefferson County, was because of that bias. So, but
and again, that's where Copenhagen Schools stepped in. Jefferson County just put their foot down and said, we're gonna get a full tax for this, and Copenhagen Schools said, okay, in order for that to happen, we will not collect any tax on that piece, any pilot on that piece. So, the plan worked, the plan came together. Unfortunately, this has now messed it up, and I think that the knowledge for you is just that we're not like directly involved. I mean, our name's on the parcels, so we're indirectly involved. Maybe this lawsuit will get resolved before it proceeds, but I think the knowledge for us is that I think the Copenhagen Schools, they haven't made any noise yet, but at some point they're gonna feel this, I think.
All right.
I think that's it for pilot updates.
All right, so moving on, temporary staff.
So we've talked in previous meetings about, given the variety of things going on and given the potential transition in my role, that maybe we look at some temporary short-term administrative support. Cheyenne's been kind of looking into that from a temporary staffing agency. We've kind of gone through our brains as if there's any individuals out there that we could hire directly, again, on a temporary role. But we also didn't really want to take any steps until after this week's election, so we're just kind of gathering information at this point.
Right, we reached out to the workplace with job description to see if they had any clear leads that we hadn't thought of. And they didn't have anything. They referred us to Penske Staffing. And I've had some discussions with them, and they sent over what would be their agreement that we would need to sign. They charge a 45% upcharge. So if we were looking at a $13 an hour position, it'd be more like 18, 19. If we were looking at the upper end, which is probably where we need to go if we wanted any QuickBooks experience, it'd be effectively like $23 an hour for the position. So we can pull the trigger on that, or, I mean, I think there's probably plenty of discussion to be had about whether we do that now or what our next step is. With also the knowledge, and we haven't really gone as far as we probably should have by now, but the chamber is looking for a new administrative assistant, and maybe there's some overlap there that we can coordinate on that person.
What time frame would you be thinking?
Given transition with me, and again, whatever other discussion you have on filling executive director position, as soon as possible, early January certainly would be helpful.
I think the discussion had been, depending on how quickly we fill the absence of Eric, there's a fair amount of one-on-one time that Eric and I are gonna need, Brittany and I are gonna need to make sure that we have all bases covered, and then once Eric's gone, if we don't have somebody in the position yet, things that Brittany and I will need to be doing, and Tim, to cover those roles until it is filled.
So the position the chamber has, is that a part-time or full-time position?
That's full-time,
And,
with some transition there as they get rid of the ATV permit system, so.
okay. So would the potential be that if the chamber hired someone that we could subcontract for some of their time, or don't you think that would?
I think there's potential. We really haven't had the discussion because it's been a week since since Laura gave her notice with them.
Seems like that would be something to explore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, we're sharing space, part of it is fielding calls and people coming in the door, right? So if we already have a person doing that for the chamber, and we could contract some time, and I guess I would like to see that at least fleshed out a little bit more before we go on to anything else.
Well, I think
Any
it's
other
good
thoughts?
that I'm assuming the top agency, when you told them what you needed, kind of fleshed out as far as availability of someone, the caliber you need. And
Yeah, I mean, they think they can find somebody for us. They didn't seem very concerned about that. Honestly, I think the chamber trying to hire independently, which, they're looking for more of a full-time, so maybe they'll have an easier time finding somebody with the higher qualifications.
So do we need,
when do we need to hire this?
that's what I was
person?
gonna say, if we wait until our next meeting and things don't go forward with the chamber, if we said at our next meeting, let's get Penske involved, or is that waiting too long? I'm not trying to push it down the road, but you guys need that transition in.
I might think, and for anybody else to add into, I might think as you continue to discuss the executive director process, it might not be a bad idea to just you continue that discussion and we open up some more discussion with the chamber. We don't need to do anything today. We have those two things move forward. And then, December though, latest, we know where we're going.
The other thing to look at is if we absolutely need this person, then maybe we should be contracting them out to the chamber in the interim while they are trying to fill a full-time position.
Oh, is it, if we had a temp?
We could have the temp and then they could reimburse us instead of vice versa, since we know what we want.
And honestly, if they were open to working together like that, which we haven't had that discussion seriously in a while, it could bring in a better candidate because we can offer health insurance, we can offer those things where the chamber cannot. And so maybe
Well, I was just talking to the temp
Yeah,
phase here.
Well, if we're gonna continue to, be co-located, I think having a person at the front door, so to speak, it seems like there's a synergy there to have a, maybe
Well, I agree,
possibly
but
long-term have a.
I think right now, the chamber's looking for a long-term, full-time person, where we're still talking about
Right,
temporary, so if we're gonna have a temp, they need to have that role filled while they're looking.
right,
It could end up being, most of the time, these temp jobs end up being a full-time job, if it's the right person for that job. So we're gonna have somebody, I don't know if we're gonna be able to fill up a full boat of time for them. So in the meantime, we might as well help the chamber out, and they can really help out our bill, get the same thing done, and then if they find a full-time candidate, temp goes away, then.
well, so I don't wanna hold up this process, but if, in the next few weeks, if we can have those discussions and move it forward and either before or at our next meeting, make some sort of, approval, then.
How many hours are we looking for? Do you know?
You can, I think that's still, just as we continue the transition, we might be able to come up with a little bit better definition of that guy. I mean, I think a 10 to 15 hour a week.
And we're positive they're looking for a 40-hour person?
their full-time is
Yeah.
35 hours.
Okay.
That's what they're looking for. I think they could take less.
And just synergy from my perspective, and that's all it is. Kristen does, I think, all of their bookkeeping, accounting.
Yeah.
She shouldn't be doing that.
We
So
should join their board and tell them that.
So if things work together, you could get them with some accounting bookkeeping skills, and they could relieve some of that on our end too, which is what we were thinking about.
Sure.
The chamber is not going to be doing the county's ATV permit system anymore either. So a lot of what that position did was mailing permits, putting things into the system, managing that whole system. So they should have a little more flexibility, there too.
I don't, why is it temporary for us? I don't get it.
I guess just to continue to see how our transition
With the
goes.
transition,
John,
okay.
and,
And
You
then,
couldn't use this going forward?
I think,
Well, and also I think just as, our activity, there's some ebb and flow to our activity, as we're working on another building.
Sure.
That's gonna be significant time over the next period of time.
Sure.
Pilots, we've got a lot of pilot activity going on right now, but a year from now, maybe not, so just so that.
go ahead. Oh, I'll just add in again that I think going forward, when we have a place now that's public, that people are coming in and out of with the chamber and stuff, that long-term, I feel like there's an opportunity for a shared person
I agree.
to have some accounting type skills but also be at the front counter for both agencies if we're, presuming we're gonna move together. So I think, right now, right, I think we certainly could make the case long-term if we can figure out the budget to do it.
Sure.
Right, but in the short term, it's getting through this transition, and then we can see where we're at, because if there's a chance to collaborate with the chamber, or if, like Eric said, that ebb and flow of projects, if we're continue to be busy with the building and that sort of stuff, then we have to look at our budget and see if we can keep those hours in there, right? But, so I think this is a starting point to see what we can work into and what kind of.
See, to me, maybe it's the end result of it all. It makes sense to have a 40-hour person that's taking care of us 10 hours a week and 30 for them, and be that front person. And to me, yes, I know it's a transition phase. And so I don't know how a temp agency works, right? They put somebody in there, and then at one point, do they become not through the temp agency?
They don't.
They're always through the temp agency.
Unless you choose to hire them, that's the beauty of the.
Okay.
You can make the choice.
Okay.
Yeah, after
Person doesn't work
9
out, so you
days.
get another person.
So Shai said 90 days.
After 90 days, there's no
Obligation.
penalty or fee for hiring.
So we
that
haven't
person.
had a conversation with the chamber, right, as to what their needs are specifically of time, or do we know?
I mean,
They say
full
full time.
disclosure, I was just elected the chairperson of the chamber board yesterday.
Okay. So tell us.
So, I mean, I think that they're planning on a full-time 35-hour
Yeah.
person. Knowing that they've lost the ATV, or they've given up the ATV permit system, but there's a lot more they can do in terms of member benefits. There's a lot more this person can do, but also recognizing that in terms of cash flow and revenue streams, the ATV permit system was a revenue stream.
Okay.
So this person, should they remain full-time,
Right.
needs to be doing enough to generate that revenue.
Got it.
But I think there's room to work there.
Okay. All right.
All right, thanks for that. Moving on.
Yep, Economic Development Strategic Committee is the item on the agenda, and I'll just toss it out there and then we let Cheyenne and Brittany jump in also. So I think the board discussed early this year, trying to get into more of a formal process and looking at our overall strategy. Again, I think the governance committee had a little bit of discussion about that a couple weeks ago. So Cheyenne put a very short summary together just to put it out there for you to think about and talk about, but to really try to get back on that thought.
So I think the intent with this committee, it goes back to Jerry's comment last meeting of being able to bring in community members for a committee. And the fact that at our board meetings, we rarely have time to discuss economic development items. A lot of it is just IDA project based, which is great, but we are also the Economic Development Agency of Lewis County. We are involved in a lot of economic development projects and initiatives, and we just feel like this is something that we need to be talking about more as a board. So with that said, we were talking about how we can't really talk about economic development if we don't know what our strategy is. So that goes back to a proposal that Christine Nakano sent us in the spring about doing a shorter strategic planning session with board, community stakeholders and staff, just to kind of figure out where we're going. And this type of committee can kind of guide that process. And then once we have a strategy in place, continue to meet on a monthly basis to talk about where we are in our strategy, whether it's a 3-year or 5-year plan, and just make sure that we're on track with our initiatives and goals for economic development. In the long term of this, we talked a lot about the SEDS process. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with SEDS. Basically, it is a countywide strategic plan. The county did have one many years ago. And if we have a SEDS plan in place, we have the opportunity to receive a lot of federal funding through the EDA. And we're missing out on that opportunity because we don't have that SEDS plan in place. And it's comprehensive economic development strategy. So I think long-term, something small with just, us, the board and community stakeholders, just to kind of kickstart a strategy and then use this committee to think long-term, get a SEDS in place so that we can use that for bigger initiatives and get federal funding for all sorts of projects.
I think going back to Brittany's comment, because you look at today's agenda, it's the same thing, right? Like, we're the IDA board, and a lot of us are here because of our interest in economic development, but we have IDA business, and we have trouble getting through that some months in our 2-hour time frame. So we don't get to the more strategic, even though a lot of us in here would like to be having those conversations and want to be part of that. We have to get through our IDA business first, and that's not a bad problem to have. We're busy as an IDA, which means we're doing good things, right? So it's not a bad problem with it.
We also need to realize that as of January 1, there is no Lewis County economic development.
Well, I mean, I think that comes back to,
Eric disappears from.
I mean, your budget proposes to have some funds for the IDA to do economic. So the mechanism switches, but
Well, and quite honestly, I'm on the IDA board. That's all I've been authorized to be on. And like these meetings that are on camera, that just is IDA business. We have an opportunity now that we actually have to do this, but it needs to be clear cut. We don't have to have the long drawn out discussions that we've been having, which are good discussions during an IDA board meeting. But right now, with Eric transitioning out, we don't actually have an authorized mechanism where, we can do it because we want to do it, but to operate officially as Lewis County Economic Development, the LCDC could do that. Right now, no one has that official mantle as soon as Eric,
but I think
So
that's where,
that's exactly where we need to figure that out. Are we just IDA staff? Who's gonna be leading, who's the organization that's leading, big picture economic development in this county? And I think we as a board need to figure that out, because Joe has an interest in economic development, but Jared is only here because it's IDA related.
no, that's not true, but this meeting right here, this is IDA.
There's a world where you could, especially considering the new streaming requirements and, transparency and things, there's a world where you guys could meet at 8 o'clock as the Economic Development Board of the county, gavel out, and then gavel in the IDA, vote on your resolutions, and close the IDA meeting. I mean, or there's a world in which, the LCDC comes in as an entire, your board and the LCDC are the Economic Development Board, and then, you gavel in just the IDA, for the last 20 minutes to vote on, IDA business. There are ways that it's done throughout the state. Just a note on the budget real quick. We will have to amend the budget, we will have to do a resolution to eliminate the Economic Development Department and transfer the additional $52,808 that we were planning on spending on personnel into a straight line item contribution. So right now, as the budget stands, the IDA is supposed to give us $56,500, okay, to offset the executive director's salary. We pay $78,000 for personnel, $30,000 for fringe, so we're paying $109,000. Then what we do is, what I'm saying is subtract the 56 that you guys would pay us, wash those things out, take the balance, which is $52,000, and add it to the straight line contribution that we already had in, which is $127,000.
so when we hire a new director for the IDA, we have that $56,000 we've been paying the county, and then we have this additional contribution from the county to essentially do economic development on their behalf.
Your total, if we can get this through the board, which, I mean, they tried to do it last year anyway, so I can see, why they would want to do this. My goal is that $180,558 would be a direct line item contribution, no strings attached, from the county to the IDA. The same way we send money to Soil and Water, Cornell Cooperative, the Historical Society, we just send it directly to you guys to do what you want. The trade-off is that, there are benefits to being a county employee. We handle health insurance, we handle retirement, you guys will have to set up your own retirement, your own health insurance, and you'll have to negotiate that contract separately.
Which we do.
Whoever you hire, so.
So we do have a retirement plan and insurance. I don't think any of our employees are currently utilizing it, but we did initiate that a few years ago for a staff member, and
and the health insurance is still in place, can be, any employee can pick it up.
so as we hire a new director, it will be the director of IDA as an IDA employee, not a county employee.
But at the same time as we make that change in the budget, I guess I think hearing Brittany's concerns and my own is that hopefully the county will designate an economic development agent.
Right,
Whether
that's
that-
what the county needs to do.
And so there will be, Joe McNichol had a quick discussion about this. For those funds that Ryan just talked about, the county and the IDA need to have a contract. And I could envision that contract would say, the IDA, County of Lewis Industrial Development HCC is now the economic development entity. entity for the county.
And that's all we need to do.
Yeah, and so I think, I think Jared's comment, let's not rebuild. You guys are a great board that yes, you're doing IDA business, but you think about overall economic development. We don't have to start from scratch. You're already there. I think what this is kind of proposing is that, number one, we go through a process very soon for you and maybe some additional people, a couple additional people in the room, you to really think through strategy. And then after that, we put a committee in place that they focus on that on a monthly basis, and that committee reports back to this board. Or again, maybe it's the LCDC board, maybe there's some change, but no big change.
And we need to pay attention to sunshine laws on this, as far as if we're all still in the same room, still talking about the same things, is that still probably a meeting?
I could see, it's just my opinion, I could
Having
see.
two other people from another.
I can see your strategy committee, your economic development strategy committee going forward is 3 of you, just like the finance committee, 3 of you and 5 other community members or economic development agency members. And then that committee reports to this board. That's just an idea of it.
So Eric, the SEDS committee responsibility now resides in the county planning office. So is it legal to pull that out of the county and put it somewhere else?
I almost just see it again as just some sort of partnership. I mean, SEDS, in my knowledge, SEDS is usually resident with the county and a county planning office, so that's where the
It doesn't have to
responsibility
be.
would be. Doesn't have to be, but it could stay there. And then just a partnership between county, IDA, and
The SEDS process, from what I've gone through this before in other places, it's more like clinical, right? I mean,
But
it's not, you guys are really talking about strategy and goals, and, I think of SEDS as like, identifying development areas, and then identifying areas that we want to protect, like literally a lot of land use, a lot.
it's more economic development strategy and where could funding priorities, where could funding be used?
Right.
Economic
Like we
development.
could, like a SEDS would say, like, we think that this area outside of Castellan is prime for residential development. Here's 5 things that could happen over the next 20 years to make residential development grow in that area.
That's part of it. So
Yeah, I've never seen one that actually, yes, you check a box so that you can.
But again, it opens up the door to potential grant
It's-
funding.
Right.
It is checking a box, but it's really overall economic development strategy. You have to have the process in place.
Right.
Doing stuff that we should be doing anyway. And if you do that, then it opens the door to federal funding, which right now the door is closed. And I don't remember, I just saw Messina, somebody, just tapped into a couple $1 million of federal funding.
Well, why is the door closed? Because there
Because
is
the
a
process is in
SEDS
place.
committee, what's that,
It's not, the plan's not up there.
limitation?
I went down this road years ago. We applied 2-3 times unsuccessfully. And then we had times we applied and the federal agency would say, you're not applicable because your SEDS committee hasn't met.
Okay.
So today,
So there is a statute of
yeah,
time.
So there's an analogy right now in the county with agriculture. There's a agricultural enhancement plan, which is a process run by Ag and Markets. That's kind of the box checking thing, right? The Ag enhancement plan has to meet Ag and Markets criteria. At the same time, the county established an Ag Sustainability Council to strategize about agricultural issues and future ideas, and it's running parallel to the Ag Enhancement Plan. Why is that? Because there's some synergies and the 2 groups are working together, but the Ag Enhancement Plan has to meet Ag and Markets criteria, where the Sustainability Council is looking beyond that and isn't restricted by those. And I think it'd be the same thing here. The SEDS process has to meet certain criteria, and that should be going on in parallel to this strategic planning committee, which is.
Why don't we just have a SEDS committee designated by the county and who's on it and covers all our bases? It gets the job done, the SEDS process doesn't fall wayside ever again, and we use that as the vehicle to do economic development.
Once a quarter, this board, meets for 5 extra minutes after and has a SEDS meeting.
Well, or this strategy committee we're talking about
Is the sense.
is the sense committee.
Okay.
It's all done.
But you're saying you want the county to get moving on this, basically.
Well, we think the first step, again, if you recognize yourself as the economic development agency, which I would suggest you do because you are, that we start with you guys going through this formal process, bringing a facilitator, really put some thought to economic development strategy, and then follow that with a committee and re-energize the SES process.
So I think, and just to put, 3 years ago, Eric and I talked about like once or twice a year having our group to get together for like a half-day work session. That we could focus on that kind of stuff instead of just our IDA business.
Pilot for rural.
And we've never done that just because of people's time, it's just hard to carve out the time to do it, right? But I think this is a more formalized way to do it and with some facilitation. Yes, there's a cost to that, but there's also, then it sets some timeline and goals and a complete, to actually stay on track. Someone's keeping you on track to get it done.
So if you authorize this, and we've worked with Christina Cano, I think she'd do a great job. If you authorize this, you take a Friday and a Saturday morning right before Christmas, so we keep this moving. And, over the next couple months, using a facilitator, you spend some time, working through that process and really focusing on strategy.
A discussion of line item funding. It would be helpful, there's gonna be a budget meeting at 5 o'clock on the 19th, right? If some of you people were there to enter into the discussion on this conversation. Because this is gonna be a struggle, probably, with the vote. So if you're there in the room, it may be helpful. We could have a broader discussion on the IDA or this committee you're talking about, assuming some of the economic development responsibilities for the county, which would go a long ways in supporting something like this. Right now?
Yes.
So, I don't know if there's other thoughts on the topic, but I think, from an action standpoint, and Cheyenne or Brittany, correct me, we think it would be great if you would authorize moving forward with that process. Our quote from Christina Cano months ago was $6,500. I don't know if Brittany's been back in touch with her, but to initiate that. We've got an idea on how, we've got a bucket of money we might tap into to fund it. I'm not worried about funding. I think we can accomplish it within our budget.
So this is 6,500 for like one time? Like, is there a
It
time
is,
attached
and I
to it?
can send you her proposal again. It was an initial half-day session with the board. There's 2 half-day sessions with community stakeholders, and then like 2 more sessions afterwards with the board. And she gets into more detail of what's included in each of those sessions, but I'll send that to you guys.
Does it seem worthwhile to you guys?
Yes.
It sounds like it to me.
Absolutely.
Are you looking for a motion to go ahead with it?
Yeah.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
jury discussion.
Why do we need the community stakeholder part of this? I'm looking at this right now, we need to figure out the nuts and bolts of this economic, the new director and where we're headed on some major things.
In my eyes, as economic development, we serve the community. So it would be beneficial to have other community stakeholders in the room providing their input on what they feel economic development should be in Lewis County.
So could a business leaders breakfast be?
So a business leaders breakfast could be a great location to talk about this stuff.
And also kind of recognizing that as we look, I don't know if you guys are as familiar with our economic development and the facets, workforce development and infrastructure, we are not the lead on all of those. So involving the people who are presumably the lead on those makes sense to feed into the bigger picture.
Housing. housing is important to economic development, but we don't get into it.
Housing, healthcare, education, workforce, site and infrastructure development, business development.
We, my organization, we actually used Christie to take us through our strategic planning process. And we had, through the process, we had 200 people participate in some point in the process. And I think it allowed us to think outside of our traditional day-to-day operational lens. So I see that as very helpful. I think Christie's very skilled in taking people through that, especially if there are differences of opinion. I think she's very skilled in navigating that world. The other thing she does, and I'm assuming it would be part of this, she spends time in getting people to articulate, where do you want to be? Because every one of us probably has a nuanced view of what economic development means. So there's that place where 50% of what we think we're all in the same place. Then after that, we start to diverge. And how do you take that and really begin to think from a progressive point of view? So I think she's good at that. So this notion of an aspirational proposition becomes an important component of a strategic direction. I've had this Kool-Aid and I'm a follower.
My biggest concern is we're gonna spend a half a day discussing what is economic development instead of what we need to do for the next 6 months or a year.
But from a process point of view, sometimes you have to do that because it'll keep coming back if we don't sort of go through a cleansing process. And traditional strategic planning, by and large, tends to be driven by the strongest personalities with the most technical knowledge. This process brings other voices into the table. And I think it's more, there's some actions that have to occur next year, but if we're really progressive and leaders, we need to think beyond 1 year. We need to think, 3, 5, maybe 8. Much beyond that, I think the landscape is so unclear to start thinking, 10, 20 years probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But so I would support this. Our strategic process lasted about, I went to the board last week, so just about 10 months. And I had some board members like, my God, this is snail's pace. There were strategic plans done in the past, but they tended to be more of a cookie cutter type. And the group that was used, when I went through the recruiting process, I saw the organizational strategic plan. It was almost identical to the organization I left. It was the same company, same format, some of the same goals. So this will break the mold. So I think there's value in that sort of progressive approach. And then staff's job is to make sure in the meetings that they're going to have with the facilitator, what are the clear things we need to accomplish? And I do think there's value in any community member who wants to participate, because through a committee structure, you can engage community members to be involved with the IDA, and then they become the future board members. So now they come in with some background, some knowledge. It took me a meeting or two to truly know what IDA meant, the letters. So imagine working through a committee structure. You begin to learn the business model, the strategies. You become a better board member at a future date. So I agree with you, but would add these other things.
That's not going to, and I don't have a problem with it for the long-term stuff, it's not going to solve our 6-month problems that we have coming up. So we're going to have to address that as well.
But the word there is interim. We don't necessarily have to solve the 6-month problem.
Well, we've got to find a new place to live within a year. We've got to make sure in the next 2 months that we have a rock solid job description and are on the hunt for that.
Right, I agree, Jared, but if we have that, if we're going down that 5 to 8 year road, that could,
I just don't want everybody to think this is gonna be the magic bullet.
right, no, I think, well, so Eric and I talked a little yesterday about like an ad hoc committee for personnel and an ad hoc committee for buildings over the next few months that, focus on that, but this process can shape some of that, right? Because if something comes out of where we need to be in 5 years, that influences the 6-month decision on a new place to live, right? So.
And on the new place to live, I forget which committee meeting it was, but Brittany did a real nice job taking us through the process of reviewing properties and sites,
Right.
worked us through a matrix and
That's a
drilled
whole
it down.
different topic, but the board hasn't decided whether we wanna own these.
Right.
that.
And that's why we need
But the point is, the committee process has done a lot of work, which I think will allow the board to have an informed conversation about own, rent, mortgage, all of that sort of thing. Yeah.
And that, part of this gets back to this whole thing about the IDA meeting, getting through our agenda and utilizing committees to bring a recommendation to the IDA board to move the process along, right? And so we don't go month to month and not make any gains in between. So we had a motion and a second on this, some good discussion, anything else? So can we get a vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's great.
All right.
I think there's a few other items we can hit pretty quickly. Lions Falls Mill line of credit, wanted to just bring back to your attention, months ago, maybe years ago, we were approved for a $350,000 grant via the IDA as part of the Lions Falls Mill project. That was it's a $1.8 million project, so our $350,000 piece was one piece of it. That project has been progressing and they've been tapping into the funds via the Village of Lions Falls. It's now our turn to pay the bills in essence for that project. So they would have to tap into our resources and our grant. As you probably know, the way the grants work is you get paid for them afterwards. So to facilitate that, we were approved for a line of credit with Community Bank for that $350,000. Just to ensure from a cash flow perspective, if we didn't want to use our own cash, we draw on a line of credit and then get reimbursed by the grant. So again, we're at that time now that we are being asked to participate and fund the work at the Lions Falls Mill. Cheyenne and I have been starting to work through that, and we would anticipate drawing in that line of credit. We'll probably use the entire $350,000, I think. And then we'll have to wait and get paid back by Empire State Development. We believe, we are told that the interest costs will be able to be covered in the grant funding. So while we will incur interest, that it should not come out of our pocket. So
Is there active work going on with that? I mean, contractors are being paid on a monthly basis.
yes, correct.
Dank is managing that process.
Correct.
Are they, 3 years ago, when I was doing construction projects with all kinds of state money, contractor submits a pay application, and then whatever agency was responsible for the project submits a pay application to the grant agency and gets reimbursed for that amount, and then cut the check to the contractor. So I don't know if Dank is following that process or how that works. They typically not wait till the project's completely finished and then get the lump sum.
Yeah, no, they generally, I would say, Jerry, they are following that process. So yes, if with the nuances and the complications of each funding source, they would do that. There was a $100,000 pay application. It's paid by the Village of Lions Falls. The Village of Lions Falls then goes and requests reimbursement. So yes, these are challenging with Empire State Development, so it's not that easy, but they do attempt to do that.
So I think it's worst case scenario.
Right. Odds are we aren't gonna have to do the whole 350
At one time.
Well, there's different steps involved, so as you meet the criteria for step 1, 2, or whatever it is, then you could submit to ESD, get reimbursed for that portion.
And unfortunately, the biggest challenge with this is our funding piece of this is through Empire State Development, and they take the longest to pay. I think the LCDC got their funds through National Grid, and they're gonna pay in about a month. so just so you're aware, we're not gonna get our money back for a year. You know, from this, I would say 6 to 8 months from the time they request it, and they won't be able to request it until probably May.
So we previously, the board previously endorsed the line of credit.
Yes.
And so your agenda item today is informational because you already have the authority to move forward.
Yes.
How, won't payments be owed on that line of credit?
Interest payments, yes.
That's, you can do just interest payments?
Yes, and it does not require, often line of credits require, once for 30 days a year, you have no balance, but this does not require that.
Yeah, I remember Tina had something.
Yeah. So yes, just informational. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So next item is the house that is attached to the former re-energy site in Lionsdale.
Yes, and so Tim put together a summary that was sent out with the packet. I think does a pretty good job of summarizing both the house and then there's some other things we're still working with re-energy on the taking possession of the biomass facility. The house, we definitely wanted, your feedback at this point. I don't know, Tim, if you want to just.
Well, I think essentially the guy living in, been in 19 years. He's indicated he'd like to buy it, but not a very rich man. We had Roger Abbey go out, he appraised it, he put it in roughly the 25 to 30 range. I guess what I'd like to do for the board, what I'd like to ask is, if the guy was willing to offer $25,000 to purchase it, that we just don't put it on the market and just sell it to the guy. And we'll probably end up paying Roger Abbey $200 for maybe for the appraisal, but
I think you would discuss this a month or so ago, and I think your discussion was, let's just go through the process and use a realtor and advertise it. That was your preference. Tim took the step of having a realtor just give us a statement of
if it went on the
value.
market today, he'd say that's about all you're ever gonna get for it.
Right.
It's
So-
a pretty rough hold.
So I think our request back is, given the real estate opinion that, if you get 25 to 30,000, you're doing good. We can advertise it for that, but do we bother
this guy out?
Yeah, and then we risk, if somebody comes in and offers us 35,000, we're gonna throw this guy out of that house, and that's not, so there are gonna be more bumps in the road than just trying to sell it to them for 25,000.
If we can sell it for somewhere close or a little less, you're okay with it, essentially.
I
I mean, I haven't approached the guy yet, I just wanna make sure the board was on board. If we got something a little less than what was appraised, you're okay with it.
Did you receive a form that indicated what the appraised value was?
I have something that was provided that said it was, in the end, it was a short review type, shorter form, but yes, I do have
Yeah,
something.
we didn't request
25 to 30.
It's not
And so it's 25 to 30.
Correct, best case.
that's what the realtor has put as a high end, or
Right.
range, I should say.
And that's at best case in the market and its location and stuff. It's in a rough spot. Put it right across from the mill, next to the re-energy. There's nothing there. The house is in tough shape.
So I think, I appreciate the ask, but from a negotiating point of view, in my mind, there's a wide band of gray. So we probably need to be more specific so that when you're out there negotiating, you know exactly what you can and can't do. So assuming that, so I'm going to, the low end of the appraisal that you received was $25,000. So I'm kind of thinking out loud. So I agree, I personally agree that if you can work an arrangement out with the fellow who's lived there for nearly 2 decades, that is probably the most appropriate and easiest thing to do without incurring additional costs. So if we as a board said, ideally get the 25, but nothing less than 85% of the appraised value. If it goes below that, then you need to come back and see us. So you have some wiggle room. And I probably didn't put that in a form of a good motion, but I think I'm saying it's worth pursuing. And if you receive 85% of the value, then I think you have a ballpark to work with it.
I think we should also list the house on our website, not through a realtor, so that way it is listed and it is open. I'm a little leery of just because you live there, you get the property without a fair shot from outside, but I don't know, can we do that, Kevin, or?
That's a really good question. If Re-Energy does it, are they gonna convey it to us and then we're conveying it? Is that the idea?
Yeah, they're gonna convey it to us when they do the final.
It'll have to
transfer,
be-
Then we'll have this house.
If they conveyed it to them, it'd be a lot easier.
Yeah, if Re-Energy was to just convey it directly to the property owner, then they can do whatever they want. But because we're a governmental agency, this is our governmental property, it's not our property to say whether it's the people's property. And so you have a real obligation of making sure that you get fair market value for it. It's also a minor step of declaring it as surplus property where you're basically saying, I don't have the use for it, you have to pass a resolution to do that anyway. But it would be, if Re-Energy could convey it directly to him.
Okay. I mean, the bottom line is this, I mean, we, to your point, if it's gonna come down to, it's gonna create governmental issues.
Yeah.
Essentially, we're trying to get a couple bucks out of it, but if we're better off just saying, here, go fill out this form and convey it, fee title from them to you and just be done with it. If they wanna give it to them, let them give it to them.
Right.
So, I was thinking maybe we could do that, but again, we're gonna get $25,000 out of this, but if they convey it directly to him, I don't know how that's gonna happen. We've been down this road a little bit. The company doesn't wanna deal with this gentleman to some extent. We can't list the property because it's not in our name. So I think we're looking at this as a good solution. The challenge for us is that if we get this property deeded to us free, we then have to ensure if we're gonna sell it, that we get fair market value. I think we can cover that step, and this will simplify it, and this is a gentleman that if we sell it to somebody else for $35,000, he's gonna make sure that the Lewis County IDA is, and the public knows that happened. So for $5,000 or $10,000, it's gonna make a lot more sense to just try and get the deal done, and when we get possession in January, we just sell it to them.
Well, but public opinion can't dictate what we do legally here. And we're trying to I understand, I think this guy should have the house, don't get me wrong. But if we have an obligation to do things a certain way, we have to do it that way, regardless of whether it's gonna cause some flack or some fluff. I mean, we did a great thing with this building, and we still caught flack for that. It's gonna happen. So we gotta make sure that we're doing what we were supposed to do and have to do for this process. And if we gotta take some heat for it, we gotta take some heat for it.
And I
But
think,
the easiest thing to do is have Re-Energy convey this property to this gentleman before it comes back to us. And we're done with it.
Okay, so the
Well, let me.
potential for income is gonna go away.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't pass up the potential for income. And I think, I appreciate Kevin's reflections, and he's absolutely right. There is a process that's fairly easy to follow. And we can have access to an asset to replenish, some of our funds, so it's worth it. In my mind.
Just have to follow that process. And
Absolutely.
The process is, here you go.
There's an established minimum fair market value of 25,000. And then you're going to be looking at, I think that's where you have to start the negotiations with them and say, this is what, we have a governmental obligation to sell it for fair market value. So if you can come up with 25, like you said in the resolution, then everybody's happy. If you can factor into other things, like if you were to put it out for sale, you'd be paying a realtor's commission, and that's gonna be $1,500 or so. So that drops it down to $23,500. You're also gonna be paying some closing costs and things like that. That can drop it down another $1,000. So that's where your wiggle room comes in, is factoring all those things in there. So you can get close to the 20,000, but I think you need to have this discussion with him starting at 25 and see how close he can get to that.
Well, Kevin's much more articulate in pointing these things out. That's how I came up with the 85.
But
You
the
know,
guys
you're
are
running
paying
through all
$100 a
those
month
things.
right now, so they're coming up, I understand, they're coming up with the $20,000 is a big issue. So,
And I would just say, I'm sorry that, Julie, I don't mean to upset you, but this is really contractual negotiations, and I think you understand that you're not gonna put in the paper,
Yeah.
we're gonna offer this guy 25.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm with you.
Thank you.
we are on TV.
After you negotiate,
Jim,
though, let me know, because it is a good story, you know, well, it is a
Jim,
funny
is
story.
this,
but
this
that's-
house that you've seen?
Yeah.
Well, fair.
It is rough. There is not even a functioning bedroom in this place. This guy sleeps on the couch.
The thing should go for $5,000 to $10,000 if we actually gonna list it, and that's what you'd sell it for.
Right, and you can have an assessed value, but if everyone comes back with much lower,
Right,
that's
well,
really your
But you have to
value.
go through that process.
Right.
Exactly right.
Well, and I think in essence, that's what you talked about a month or so ago. List it, that'll determine your market value, and then we can sell it to that guy. We're kind of just trying to shortcut that process, but make sure we do the legal steps to cover it.
Who appraised it?
Roger.
Does he work for himself?
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, Realty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was, you know.
Well, so there's a difference in appraisers as well. If you're looking at a bank sending an appraiser, they're not gonna appraise it as high as a regular real estate appraiser might appraise it. Simply from a
Yeah.
point of view of a bank is from a risk standpoint, whereas realtor is from trying to make it for the client. So I'm just asking.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So you get a bank to appraise it and it shows up at 15 grand, because that's how much equity they see in there, well, there you go. I'm just saying it makes a difference to appraise it.
Another way to make sure, just since the county buys and sells assets all the time, another way to make sure that you're definitely getting fair market value is auction it. And if it's a piece of crap property that he's the only one that's gonna bid on it, then there's your fair market value. And the auctioneer handles everything else, the fees, everything.
Yeah.
But this guy could get outbid.
Covers
Well,
legally.
that's the thing, he might have to move.
In my opinion, if he doesn't end up with a house, there's probably gonna be too much light
It's gonna be what?
It's gonna be what?
Off the record.
What is that? Oh, I didn't know that's coming out.
I never heard it before. I never heard it before either.
Well, apparently.
Does it have insurance on it?
That's usually where it comes from. But
So I think the important part of the conversation is to Eric and Tim, do you feel like you have a sense for how to move forward and what to do? Or do you need a
Yeah, just
vote?
talking with Kevin, also just to make sure we're following this process.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of like I said, I can at least go back and talk to the guy and say, hey, look, board's met. There's an appraised range, 25 to 30.
I mean, I don't know what a bank appraisal costs, but I think Goggins Point's a good one because there can be a difference between a bank's appraisal and a realtor's appraisal.
So see somebody like Eric Sunderhouse possibly going to do this.
Well, so we got a line of credit with some bank, we gotta see what we can do for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Since it will be an asset, we're gonna have to put on.
All right,
Yeah, you're right, Larry,
good, just,
we'll have to get it.
I'm
good
just,
discussion.
Quasi-governmental.
All right, so do we want,
Well,
so,
let's acknowledge Kevin for keeping us on the straight and narrow on this one, so we appreciate that.
do we have any official motion to get a bank appraisal and, you know, I mean,
Bank appraisal and follow the identified process for dealing with surplus assets and working with Ms. Ricardo to can help navigate that.
Maybe just, we don't want to continue this conversation, maybe Kevin can correct me, I think a bank appraisal, I'm not 100% sure. The bank's just going to use Good Morning Realty or something to do an appraisal. Maybe it's just a terminology thing, we ask Roger Abbey, because he's already done the basics of is your value based on the real estate fair market value or a bank appraisal value? Just another step that I don't know if it's going to get us anywhere to do a bank appraisal.
You may want to check, ask Roger that question
Yeah,
straight out, and he'll
right.
give you a straight answer.
Right.
And my guess is that he's given an informal appraisal with a pretty good range in it, and his lower end is probably.
Yeah, just to re-ask the question to Roger to see if this is a bank appraisal value. And so if you want to give us motion, action, maybe back to Jerry's point is just to, given the value that we get from an appraisal, an informal appraisal, and that we work with that value, 85% is the floor, and we need to justify it and use Kevin to ensure that we don't sell it for an amount that we shouldn't sell it for.
Formalize it when we get it.
Right.
Hard off.
Right, we're a couple months, 2-3 months away from doing this. What we would do in the near future is finalize negotiations with this guy. We can't sell it to him until after January.
Okay, so then we don't have a formal steps today, but
Yeah.
more homework.
I got formal steps to follow the formal process.
Alright. Alright, so it's 9:50. We had the property research and then there was, the Duke thing if we got back to it, but we got about 10 minutes there for what do you want?
So update on the property research, and again, both committees, and I think every board member was in attendance. Both committees had an update on what we are looking at for future offices. We really, at that point, we're focused on one building downtown. We've done a little bit more work. We've had an engineering firm walk through the building. Tim, did we get something?
I did not, when I left, that's exactly where I went to go and see if I could see something.
We asked them to send us something by this morning, and just kind of a real high level, analysis from them. So I'm not sure that we've got much else to report today. I think from the walkthrough of that building with the engineering firm, it almost raised more questions than answers. So need to continue to look at that, maybe go back to the list a little bit, look at some of the other choices.
Ballpark, what's the asking price for that building?
185.
Yeah, ballpark, how much money do we have left over from ESD from that grant?
135.
Oh, look.
That's really,
That's
the asking
reinvesting,
price is really not the issue.
well, no, but that's reinvesting ESD's money very
Yeah.
quickly, having the project already identified and
Well,
gets us out of, so we're actually spending IDA money, we're spending grant money that we had to do economic development with.
and I guess,
So there are some reflections that are giving you concern about the structural integrity of the building. Is that kind of
Just need a different engineer.
not so much the structural integrity, but just the cost to make it functional.
Yeah, the amount of work, Jerry, that is required is going to be a bit, from a structural standpoint, I think the bones are there. The thing of it is, if you go around and walk the building from the outside, it needs to be stripped down and re-sided and all that stuff. There's a chunk of the roof that needs some work, not large, but the general, the membrane on this roof is in good shape. The foundation is actually in very good shape. The floors between the buildings, need to be redone. They're just sagging big time in the middle. It's just a large span, so it'll need to be literally gutted and insulated over time, all new windows. We won't require fire suppression systems, but we will require some sort of lift system between floors and stuff. So you're looking at essentially a numbers, several hundreds of thousands, if not a 7-digit number before it's all over with. And the thing you gotta wrestle with, the board's gonna have to wrestle with is any building we buy that's gonna require we're gonna end up and the market you have here, you're gonna end up upside down from the standpoint of numbers. Then the question is, to me, is this the long-term home? In which case, we should make it right. Because one thing about it, it's in a great location, it's got a lot of potential. It's just, from an investment standpoint, we have to wrestle with what's right, in terms of the IDA, long-term, and, get by that.
And I think we've talked just a little bit about dollars, but I think this, to one of Jared's comments too, is to think about what do we, are we gonna own something, are we gonna rent something, where's the funding coming from? And to Tim's point, we're probably not gonna have all the money available to do something right, we're gonna have to borrow also, so is it the right place that if we borrow for, a 20-year mortgage that we need some revenue to pay for?
Yeah.
So we need to work through that too, and I think to also to remind you, I think, so we're looking at, we're gonna have $900,000 in this, in our reserve fund when we settle out the sale of this building. We're gonna have another $130,000 coming in from ESD for that grant. We've got two projects that we prioritized among the two. One was our office, and two is let's start to move forward at the Lions Falls and Mill property. So with that money available, $1 million, how are we gonna allocate that? And for a building for our office, we could spend the whole $1 million. But if we choose to allocate some to Lions Falls, then we're gonna have to carry some debt on an office, likely. So that's where we are. And again, we need to think through the own, rent, spend all our money.
Exactly.
I mean, the one thing about the building there is you can phase it. I mean, you have a larger, probably 50 to 60 60% upfront investment in this building in order. 'Cause the second and third floor, we can live right initially with making them usable, but not necessarily investing heavily into the refurbishing of those floors initially. Because there's a little over 2,000 square feet on the bottom floor. But in order to hook this whole co-working thing, you do want to build up. I mean, and Joe and I had another discussion yesterday on the building. This building is funny from the standpoint of there's actually two parts of it. There's a standalone building where the furniture store is, and there's also actually half of the next building over that's attached to the former Lord's offices. Another approach to this thing, given the investment and stuff, would be potentially go in that other building and eventually take over that whole building. Somebody suggested turn this into a parking lot, I mean, that's another thought process in terms of growth phasing and likes of that. But it doesn't get us there as quickly as we want to in terms of our needs, in terms of because the space would be very small initially because it's only part of that building next door, and then who knows when the people that own the rest of it would sell it. We'd have to establish it. I mean, it's a very slow approach to life, and I'm not sure it's the best way to go, but there are advantages to creating parking downtown.
Well, the rehab costs, so that's new information since the committee had a briefing.
Yeah, we don't have a firm number. I mean, other than we got a gut from these guys that, you're talking several hundreds of thousands of dollars at a minimum to probably 7 days. I mean, if you look at 8,000 square feet times $175 for refurbishment, you do the math, It's there if you go full out and do the whole building. But if you phase it, grants, and, build your way up.
We got the first floor functional, we could go after some grant money to rehab the second floor for co-working space, that sort of thing. So we're getting towards 10 o'clock and, we ask a lot of people's time, but as I mentioned before, we have a finance committee, we have a governance committee. There's other tasks that those committees are already doing that we've been utilizing them to bounce some of these ideas off of. I'm really asking if we want to have a couple temporary committees related to personnel in the building because finance and governance have other things to talk about when they meet. And do we want to, so we're not back here a month rehashing this again, can we?
I don't know if a committee is the right thing, we need a work session.
Right.
I think eventually, we're gonna have to make a decision on this building. I mean, technically, we're here till the end of next year. If we're gonna move forward with this building, you gotta take a step of buying it. And then you still got engineering, because it's over 20 grand, we're gonna have to have engineers and all this other stuff. And it's gonna take some time to get there. Plus codes and all this other stuff that we're gonna have to work and deal with.
I would love to be able to put the vision together for that building and then pitch it to a developer and have them
take care of everything, and then we do the grants and everything, help them along with that.
We've talked about that, we're on the verge of what's allowable, what's not allowable, that's not, Julie won't write this down, but that's,
None of this is-
having private development for us is a great idea, but it doesn't solve all the problems.
Okay, here's a building, here's a space, you could do this, we're going to lease this much property right off the bat.
You're saying where you got, we would give you, 30-year space anchor tenants right out of the
Right,
bat.
anchor tenant.
You're saying, here's an opportunity to make something happen.
Yeah, that's in our mind, for sure, so.
All right. Well, so to Jared's point on work, so again, I think it'd be great if we had the time to do a work session. So the question is, do we want a whole board work session, which would be awesome, or do we need to divide and conquer and split up the group to tackle these two different issues and kind of divide and conquer a little bit out of respect for people's time?
Probably looking to do both,
Okay.
2 splits, or whatever we split it up, to work on those issues, and everybody gets together, hashes them out.
Okay.
I think that would be a little more time, but you've got focus group on this, and then everybody gets together. And
I think for 2 different topics, for a building, I would think you could spend a short amount of time, right now, where you are today, you only need a short amount of discussion, maybe on philosophy, we don't have enough information yet.
well, priority 1 right now is staff.
Exactly, so I think if you have a meeting with, again, 2 different committees or 2 different topics, you should, if you don't mind me, you should in the very next week, spend a lot of time talking about your staffing transition. And you can spend 15 minutes right now talking about the building.
Well,
The
we need
building's
to
more
know
for
about
the
where we
future.
want to be at least for the next year. You guys are operating in a vacuum right now because we haven't given you direction on what we as a board think needs to happen. So you guys are doing an awesome job, but you're not getting any direction from us, just criticism, mostly from me. But, we need to put this plan together and give you guys some direction for where we're going, at least for the next 6 to 12 months.
So can we do a doodle poll and try to find a time in the near future to get as many of us as possible together?
From the building standpoint, maybe you ought to be looking at number 2 and 3.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think we should just get you guys an RV and be all over the place. Economic development.
Don't tell me that.
Economic development, I'm in the parking lot every day, business of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, the folks in Lions
Well,
Hall,
that's
we have
great.
real estate.
Yeah.
You get a toy hauler with a conference table in the back, a meeting room.
Yeah.
Up to you.
Your best ideas yet.
Then we can have
Apparently,
our meetings up in Pinckney or something where there's no internet service.
Now you're talking.
All right, so thank you, everyone. Do we have a motion then?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All right, Jared. All
Right.
right, thank you.
So my guys been working on control bill stuff.
Yeah.
We clear